Today we talked about how to have spiritual conversations. Last week I asked you what was the hardest part for witnessing or sharing the gospel when you're at work or in school, maybe in the dorm. And what we find is that sharing the gospel begins to feel artificial, contrived, maybe manipulated by one person trying to get the other person into that conversation. Spiritual conversations are maybe a solution for that. In a spiritual conversation, two people engage in a low intensity, dialogical, back and forth conversation where no one really leads it and the conversation progresses at its own speed and neither one knows really how it's going to end. To have conversations like that, we have to have two things and balance them. One is we have to really know what we're talking about, and the other is we have to listen really well to understand what they're talking about. And then the gospel rises out of that conversation. The more we know about the human condition in general and about the power of God to overturn that condition, and the more we listen to what people are actually going through with all the details, the stories, and the redundancies, and we put those two together, knowledge of the gospel in a sensitive, open source spirit, the gospel begins to appear in that conversation. And it isn't contrived, and no one is getting there first. We get there together. The gospel that we talk about has four components. One, people are caught in a struggle. Two, in the midst of that struggle, God has come in and made an outrageous announcement, or He's done something that is unbelievably good. Three, we are called to respond to what God has done in some kind of way. And four, as we respond, change occurs. So the human condition that we discussed today is thirst. We said people's problem is not first that they're sinners, it's that they're thirsty. Sin is what people do to quench their thirst. They try things, and the more they try, the emptier they get. They literally drink themselves into dehydration. They stuff themselves empty, trying to find a solution for a thirst, and they can't find it. The announcement is that God has come into their world, to satisfy that thirst in the person Jesus Christ. Everything that they're looking for, they will find in Jesus Christ, and they will never understand their thirst until they've found Jesus Christ. What that requires in response is for them to seek after God and then turn from their own ways, from the things that they've gotten tied up in, to let those things go. And it may take a while, but they have to commit themselves to do that. And as they do it, real change occurs. Their lives begin to open up. They get closer to other people instead of further away. Their shame turns to innocence, and their toil turns to rest. Their bondage turns to freedom. The feeling of isolation turns to a feeling of union with God and with other people. Their lives get bigger, not smaller. So you can see that's a really outrageously good story. The problem in the church often is that we've minimized the story. We've told people that the gospel's the forgiveness of sins, it's reconciliation with God, it's justification, it's peace with God, it's eternal life in heaven, and it's all of these things, but more. The gospel is more optimistic than we keep telling people. If a person is in bondage, they're not after forgiveness, they're after freedom. And if a person feels isolated, they're not after reconciliation, they're after union with the God who made them. If a person's life is dying, they're not after heaven. They want life now. They want to go to heaven before they die, not just after. So the call this morning to our people and to you now is to go into our places and share the gospel, the whole gospel, not just the message of reconciliation and peace with God and the forgiveness of sins. All those are important, but they're the first step on the road back to holiness.